You're with Julian on the Brown Notes, doing album reviews, and apologies for my head cold, which is going to mean that each review is going to get shorter and shorter as my voice is going as well. I should change t-shirts. I'll change the t-shirt each time for the next two, so it looks like I'm doing them at a different period. This is a review of the debut album by Chat Pile from Oklahoma City. So, in the UK, we call them slag heaps. It sounds like these guys come from, like a Braddock or somewhere. Some place where it used to be an industrial town and everything that they've excavated and all of the toxic waste has been put into these piles, giant piles. And I think that's what the term chat pile means, which gives you a fair indication of where these guys are coming from. Like many acts today, they aren't giving us their real names, but their names that they have given us are rather good. Ray Gun Bush on vocals, Luther Manhole on guitar, Stin on bass, and Captain Ron on drums. And this is their first album called God's Country. A potentially ironic term, I would suggest. And every year since Death Heaven and Sunbather, there's been a hardcore act that has crossed over to the mainstream. Because I'm a dilettante, I don't listen to genres in great depth. I usually have other people tell me what to listen to. But I will, so I'll hear a couple. Already this year, we've had two incredible debut albums in this sort of hardcore noise realm with Soul Glo, Diaspora Problems, one of the biggest reviews I've done this year. And now this one, God's Country. It's a fascinating album. Like Soul Glo, it's a very political album, not, all the way back to At the Drive-In, sort of heavy politics. So Slaughterhouse starts it off, and it's almost, I think like 90s alt rock, particularly sort of post-grunge alt rock. And I see that grunge died pretty soon for me because I just felt it got so dated really quickly and I never went back to it. But that sort of post-grunge sensibility and sound, like 9 Inch Nails or Alice in Chains or something, really sort of like the opener Slaughterhouse. I really sort of felt that. And the big gated drums, which is another thing that is a prevalent throughout the album, and the desperation in the vocals, and lyrically it's one of the most memorable albums of the year. The eye of God is always watching, there's no escape, and he sort of varies between some very sort of morbidly dulled deliberately spoken word, and absolute torturous screaming, and it's great stuff. But I thought the second track, Why, really stood out for me because he just rails for like 3.5 minutes about why do we let people sleep on the street. It's such an amazingly simple question. Why do we let people sleep outside? Why? What does he say? We have the resources, we have the means. I've slept on a park bench once, and I spent 10 months in a homeless shelter. Wasn't great, to be honest. But the fact that we can let people do it for decades when we have the resources not to, and we step over them, and his anger here, I loved it. It was so straight. It was like there's no irony, there's no satire. It was just straight, screaming into the void. Stuff like, I've never had to push my shit around in a shopping trolley, and you're like, well, no. And why the hell do we do this? So it's even though a lot of art tends to involve a lot of irony and satire and double meaning, straight down the line here, and I really, really appreciated that. Pamela, the third track, it's almost got this like angry Cure vibe. If you've only heard Friday I'm in Love by The Cure, try them in the pornography era. They were scarbarous and just awesome. And that's kind of what it reminded me like. And it's got this whole BDSM vibe, torture porn vibe going through through the record, which I really liked. There are some duller tracks which detract from it a tiny bit, maybe like a couple, maybe two, maybe three tracks that aren't quite as compelling, like Wicked I thought was a little bit duller, but then that's followed by Anywhere, which is probably the most anthemic riff on the whole album. Instantly sort of up there with the kind of big riffs you get on something like Rated R by Queens of the Stone Age. So it's like this droning riff. At the Drive-In are always a spectre that are going to be in the background of albums like this, particularly if they're political, and particularly, you know, like the Soul Glo one as well, if they're in that sort of hardcore bracket. Again, the 90s vibe. I think like if you're in the right mood for this kind of music, you can really get into the vibe of this cacophony. It's almost like you adjust to its wavelength, and it just feels good. I think like the probably the darkest track on here is the one that's a ballad with minimalist backing called "I Don't Care If I Burn," which appears to be the lead up to a murder. And it's very dark and it's very confronting, with just tiniest pulse in the background of music, and this guy obviously going into some woman's home, and he's going to kill her. Reminded me a bit of Frankie Teardrop from Suicide, and the minimalism of the musical production in the background did as well. It's a narrative song. I think that in the modern era, our ability to understand double meaning or irony or satire is so pathetically bad that people take everything so literally. But this is clearly a sort of like murder ballad, and it's got a terrifying scream in it. And the whole thing ends on the one really long track, like 9 minutes long, Grimace smoking weed. I think Grimace was like a mascot for McDonald's or something. Big purple Mr. Blobby sort of thing, Teletubby sort of thing. And that is the most prog rock song on here, and it's the funniest as well. Sounds like this guy just going mental in his bedroom after smoking weed and getting really paranoid and seeing monsters coming out of the bed, under the bed, and it's just like losing his mind. You know, it's like paranoid nightmare. Sounded a little bit Death Heaven-y at the times as well. So overall, terrific debut album. Loved so much about their attitude and their politics and their delivery. So much that was great about it. Couple of 2, maybe 3 songs that were just a bit more middling, just a bit more sort of drifty and punishing to sort of get through, but not in a bad way. They were just sort of average tunes on an album that's otherwise fantastic. So I'm going to give Chat Pile God's Country, one of the debuts of the year, an 8.5 out of 10.